Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. A very warm welcome to everyone. Today we have a very special guest on our another session of Conversations on Consciousness, Shri Kalyan Kumar ji. We welcome you to the session.
Thank you.
Let us begin with a small prayer.
Sure.
Sarvatma sarvadrugyosau sarvadhyasa nirasakrit satatam sannidhattam me hridaye paramashivah. For the benefit of our audience, I would like to introduce Kalyan Kumar ji. Kalyan Kumar ji is a Shishya of Param Pujya Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji and has undergone the 3 years residential course with Pujya Swami ji at Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, Coimbatore, India from 1995 to 1998. An alumnus of IIT Banaras, Varanasi, Kalyan Kumar graduated as an engineer and was working in India and later US as a software engineer. During the 4 years stay at Varanasi, Kalyan Kumar ji was part of student spiritual group called Vivekananda Nidhi, through which he came in contact with gurus from many sampradayas like Avadhuta Sampradaya, Shakta Sampradaya, Aurobindo Yoga, etc. After many years of spiritual sadhana, he was blessed to meet his guru Param Pujya Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji at Arsha Vidya Gurukulam in Salisbury, USA. Immediately, Kalyan Kumar ji decided to study Vedanta with Pujya Swami ji. After completing the 3 years residential course at Arsha Vidya Gurukulam, Kalyan Kumar ji settled in Chennai and has been teaching Vedanta and Sanskritam to interested people in Chennai. Pujya Swamiji asked Kalyan Kumar and his Guru Bhai Jaishankar ji to buy some land in rural area and build a Gurukulam in around 2010. As a tribute to his Guru Kalyan Kumar ji, along with Jaishankar ji and Sri Vidya ji, they are now building Arsha Vidya Varshini Gurukulam at Dakshinamurti Sarovar, Tirunelveli district, India. The plan is to build a Gurukulam with rooms, lecture hall, kitchen, dining facilities for at least 50 people to stay and study. At present, there is a simple temple of Vallabha Mahaganapati, Sharadamba and Adi Shankaracharya, and a Goshala for the protection of Desi cows. Kalyan Kumar ji plans to teach Vedanta and Samskrita primarily for adults, but also plans to have yoga camps, children camps, and youth camps in future. As of now, he is conducting online classes on Vedanta, Bhagavad Gita, and chanting in both English and Tamil. We welcome you to our session, Kalyan Kumar ji. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you.
I'll directly move to the questions, and we all ask the same questions to our speakers on how did their interest in Vedanta start? Please share about your life journey. How did it all start? Can you please tell us about from the beginning?
Sure. First of all, I would like to thank you and your academy for this human act of bringing people who have been pursuing the Advaitic study as well as teaching. And it is very important that we bring this kind of a conversation, not so much to throw light on us, but more for people to understand what are the different things that they would encounter when they are having such a pursuit. Okay. So in answering your questions as well, I would try and make it focus towards that. So bring out things which can help people understand. Not everybody has a journey, right? And whoever you spoke to will have their own unique way by which they have ended up with Vedanta. And each story will be interesting. But what is important is what as an audience I get out of this. Is there something that... So I think that is, I understand that is what is the focus here. Not so much to learn about me per se, but more from what we have gone through, right?
Yes.
I have, from the childhood, I've been exposed to different aspects which are linked to Vedanta, but didn't really know about Vedanta or anything in the early days of my life. I've been a religious kid, as I learned from my parents, and I remember from my early days, I used to be somewhat, fascinated by religious aspects. But more importantly, the time when I grew up, which is probably early to mid 70s, when I was born and was going through my initial years. Tamil Nadu in particular had a lot of sadhus. I mean, that has come down off late. But what interestingly we used to find in my village, for example, so while we had temples and religious activities, we also had a mutt, okay, on the banks of Kaveri in Tanjore district. And there was some yeti who was there. So we didn't understand what they do, but we could see that there was something like this, some pursuit like this, right? And the other interesting thing was, this was not seen in those days as an uncommon thing, right? You would always hear that this uncle took sannyasa and some neighbor took apat sannyasa and all that. So the spiritual pursuit in those days was along the religious pursuit as well. Because today, I'm saying all this because today people look sannyasis as a different species, right?
Correct.
So we don't even understand what this pursuit and all that, because that kind of common aspect, element of lifestyle, which was there in those days, has come down. So that is one. Second, I think today we hear more about different kriyas and yogas and all that more. But in my childhood, we used to hear more about jnana, jnani, and those kind of terms, right? So this pursuit was always seen as seeking a knowledge, right? Whether people, I don't know how many people understood, but at least reasonable number of people understood that they are seeking a knowledge, right? That's why they were called jnanis or jignasus, right? Whatever that is. Now that made people to look upon this pursuit as something worthwhile or something to aspire for, because you are seeking knowledge. Today we call gurus as god men and those kind of terms, right? In those, when I was born up, it wasn't like that, right? So that was one. Second, even from my maternal side, they were linked to another guru called Reddiyapatti Swami and Swamihal, and they had their own some spiritual practices. So while there was religion, I also grew up seeing some of these things. Now, so that's how it all started. So I grew up like that. I'll talk about Swami Krishnananda and others when I talk about the Avadhuta Sampradaya. So I came in touch with a lot of people, and I also did my schooling from Ramakrishna Mission. So I, like, almost 7 years I studied there. So I had a good exposure to the spiritual pursuits. I had studied parables of Swami Ramakrishna, Paramahamsa, and Swami Vivekananda's complete works and all that. So that is, so I had some view of spirituality. I had something about religion. I had so all those things, right? There was lack of clarity, but there were quite a few things going on. So while I knew I wanted something out of this, but I didn't really understand what it is all about. So then I think I was, me along with Jai Shankar, we were going around trying to figure out what this is. When we were in the US, we were working together. That's when I met Pujya Swamiji. Okay, so once I met Pujya Swamiji, then things started getting clear, and then I understood what Vedanta is about. That's how the pursuit started. I'll talk about some of these things as we go along, but yeah, that is how I got into the Vedanta.
And you made a very interesting point, how now we call sannyasis or gurus as godmen, which is very odd, and it does not suit the role they play in our society at all.
Exactly.
Yes. And you mentioned about Pujya Swamiji, and when you met Dayananda Saraswati ji at Salisbury in US, you immediately decided to study Vedanta. And what made you to take up the study with Swamiji? And could you tell us about the interactions that you had, some anecdotes from Swamiji? What kind of influences that he had on you?
Sure, yeah, it's a long talking about Pujya Swamiji will take a lot of time, but I will cover some of the key elements. So, like I mentioned, we have this conflict because many of us are brought up in the modern era, so with a certain outlook in life, and then we see all the special people who are pursuing spirituality and other things, and then you also have a religious thing. So, and I wasn't able to reconcile this, right? And when I read the modern Vedantic text, it talks about consciousness, awareness, and all kinds of things. And they also often we read about, them not really appreciating the rituals and how the customs are. So there was this conflict in my mind in terms of how do they all come together, right? Do they really fit together, or is spirituality a totally different thing? And I didn't have any idea on Vedanta anyway. So this was going on. And one thing I forgot to also mention, 1994, when just before I moved to the US, was the centenary celebration of Kanchi Paramacharya was going on. So at that time, during that time, one of the local magazines here published a weekly small booklet based on his works, and that is where I had some initial exposure to what is called Veda and Vedanta. Till then, I was more looking towards some spiritual practices. I was oriented towards that. Now, that was my only exposure. But then when I was in the US, I was, along with Jaishankar ji, I was going around to find out different things. And I also had some exposure to Shakta and all that. I'll talk about it later. But I wasn't very clear what the pursuit is, and we had this this conflict about what is religion, what is spirituality, how do I pursue, is there something called spiritual upliftment? We all have our own views, right? And then 4 paths to realization that we read about. So all that was there. And I wasn't very particularly enamored by Vedanta speakers because I wasn't sure if they are aligned, because I was also a little traditional into that kind of a thing. So I wasn't really sure, are they just talking or is there any connect, right? That's when in 94, I went along with Jaishankar ji to meet Puji Swamiji sometime in December. But that time there was some talk going on. Neither Jaishankar ji nor me understood much. I think Jaishankar ji also spoke about it in his thing. We just, as usual, there was one more Swami, we prostrated, took some prasada and came back. But it was in 95, I think in August or September, we went again. Okay, I was in Colorado in December, but I had moved to New Jersey along with Jaishankar ji in sometime in June 95. So I went and met. We just went to the ashram, and Puji Swamiji was incidentally addressing some of his, I don't know if students or devotees, there were like 10 people, and he was standing next to Dakshinamurti Vigraha, and he was talking about that Murti. Okay, he was describing how that Murti had different aspects of the Vedic vision, right? And he spoke about how Panchabhutas are in that Vigraha, right? In fact, some of the things that he mentioned were really like revealing, right? He was talking about how, wind is shown by tying a bandana on his hair. Okay, by implication, it shows wind. And so he was showing how Panchabhutas are there, how the Murti is there, and how Bhagavan is both Nimitta Karana and Upadana Karana, how man and woman are both shown in the same Vigraha. And he was describing it for like 10-15 minutes. And that was the one that whatever I was having this conflict on, does religion, spirituality, practices, Vedanta, all these come together at any point? I think I somewhere saw that this getting clarified, right? In one talk, you won't get everything, but I could at least see something new, right? In the sense, like, I'm able to see that he's both traditional as well as modern, right? He is able to use English as a language. He has a way to communicate. So it was all coming together for me. And then I actually sat through for a couple of sessions, and few very, very important things from Puji Swamiji, which I don't know if a lot of people recognize. One is the importance of pramana pravritti, right? The pramana vyavahara, how Shastra becomes a pramana as a direct means of knowledge for aparoksha jnana. I think the way to handle Shastra as a means to pass on the vision to students, right? He spoke about it. Okay, and I again, that was another thing. I wasn't very sure where this Vedanta, Veda and practices are coming together, right? When he spoke about the Pramanyam and how the Purva Bhaga has a different way to look at Pramana, when, Kartritantram and Vastutantram and all that he spoke about. then it became even more clear that, yeah, I mean, I have seen somebody who can actually bring it all together for me, right? That is how I think I recognized that I found somebody who I want to learn from. And I went and spoke to Puji Swamiji. He didn't actually resist. He just once asked me, I mean, are you really sure, right? Or can you wait? Because you have a lot of time, you are young, so why do you? I was hardly like 23, 24 that time. So then I told Puji Swamiji, no, Swamiji, I mean, I don't even know what lies in store in the future. So obviously, I would have different kind of pressures come in later, but I want to just come and study. Okay. Then Puji Swamiji said, okay. In fact, he didn't take a lot of time.
And you
Same,
were working at the same time?
I was working in the US. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So then I told him that I want to. So I knew that he was doing this 3-year course because Jaishankar ji had also spoken to him. So then I said, I'll come and study there. So that's how, yeah, I got to study from Puji Swamiji. And after that, I mean, there has been quite some things because obviously we all stayed with him for 3 years. So we have had casual conversations. We have had Swamiji take classes. We have spoken in front of Puji Swamiji. So he has given a lot of views on it. So I mean, we have had very significant interactions with Puji Swamiji, and each one of it has been a great learning. And what we are today is all because of Swamiji. Yeah.
And your story, reminded me of Upanishad Vakya, Vidyate Hridaya Granthe Stidyante Sarva Samshayaha. The famous Vakya, when you meet a guru,
Correct.
yeah, all the doubts that you have gets clarified
Correct.
clarified. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and one more thing I wanted to add, sorry to interrupt, right?
yeah,
And
sure.
see, one very important thing about Puji Swamiji that many of us could relate to was he also went through the same kind of process. Okay, he was also born into a very common household, and he studied in normal school. He went to some Air Force for some time, and then he heard some Vedanta lectures, and then he came into this process, and he also was influenced by a lot of modern day Vedanta texts, right? And they look at it in a different way. I mean, there are few things from tradition to the modern Vedantic books. There is a significant gap, right? Because I have a feeling that. So I actually spoke to you about how the sannyasis and jnanam and all that were looked at in those days, right? That changed, I feel, into the modern Vedantic is because a lot of our seers or yatis also went overseas, and they tried to address a Western audience, and in trying to package it for them. So if you see most of these works that we read today in Vedantic texts, they were all focused towards a Western audience, right? Most of them, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
starting from Swami Vivekananda, a lot of it has been created with Western audience in mind, and because of which it has been sort of repackaged. And when we also come through that path, right, then it becomes little difficult to reconcile ourselves in terms of what is Vedanta about and what is a spiritual pursuit. And Puji Swamiji also went through the same thing, and he had to himself discover this through a lot of effort. In fact, without knowing Telugu, he went to Pranavananda ji, and that's how he learnt about how is Veda as a pramana and how does the jnanam take place and all that. So because he went through that, he was able to relate to a lot of issues that we face, right? What are the things that we were able to not understand, right? And because he had that, right, he had the same problems. So he was able to articulate those well. Second, he also baked in things like modern psychology and those kind of things into Vedanta to make sure that we recognize what it means when tradition says vasana, right? What does it mean, right? He used to bring in things like unconscious and the core personality and those kind of things which are purely modern psychology terms, and then related to Vedanta. So that is where I thought Puji Swamiji was able to bridge between the tradition and today. Yeah, it was a big revelation. Yeah.
Yes. And the Kalyan Kumarji, apart from Dayananda Saraswati's influence, you have also been inspired by Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, Vivekananda, when you were young and at university also. How did it influence your thoughts at that age, when you were young? And what are the lessons that you carry till today?
Sure. So, like I mentioned, from class 6 till 12, I studied in Ramakrishna Mission. And so, one of the greatest things that missions like this do is at a very young age, they at least expose you to various kind of things. From the practices like meditation, they used to have sessions, and we used to have a MI period one day in a week for an hour. So where they talk about different things, not only Ramakrishna Paramahamsa stories, Swami Vivekananda teachings, and also they used to bring things from Myanmar and other things, right? So all those were there. And another important thing was whenever that we used to, excel in studies, get some good ranks in school, they used to distribute prizes, which were predominantly some good books written by Swami Vivekananda and all those things, right? So, irrespective of how serious we were, we at least got to hear it, right? At that time, we were not, as kids, we are not too serious, but at least we knew what it was about, right? That's how it all started. But I remember from class 8, 9, I developed some interest. I think there was a golden jubilee celebration of the school, and then there were some books which were given. So I started reading parables of Swami Ramakrishna. And I read portions of complete works of Swami Vivekananda. Obviously, they are all truly inspiring works. I read the letters of Swami Vivekananda and all that. In fact, when I joined a job, from the first salary, I wanted to buy only Swami Vivekananda's work, and I bought all the 8 volumes of complete works of Swami Vivekananda from my first salary. So I was so much into it. And like you also read out, I was part of Vivekananda Nidhi in my college. So it was a student group. We used to again meet every week and read through works from Swami Vivekananda, Ramana, and all that, and have a discussion just to understand what it is. And I was linked to the Ramakrishna Mission in Banaras. I had the Belur Mat Swamiji was also was introduced to me. So I used to go to Ranchi to do some seva in Ramakrishna Mission. So my significant portion of my spiritual journey is because of the works of Swami Vivekananda and Ramakrishna Mission, right? And in terms of what I carry, there are quite a few things. Obviously, Vivekananda's quotes are many, right? You can talk about things about self-confidence, arise awake, and then inner journey. And he used to talk about how we are as good as our senses. If we had a 6th sense, how will your perception be of the world? These are things that make you think, right? So what are senses? What is a person? All those things I carried from Swami Vivekananda. And parables of Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna is one of the excellent. In fact, one of the stories that I even quote in my classes. Very, very simple parable. He says, it's a 3-line story, right? Somebody went to a drama along with the mat. So the drama hadn't started. So he had to wait. So he put the mat on the floor and he just slept. When he opened his eyes, the drama was already over. So he folded it and went away. That was a parable. That's all the story is. And how it depicts a lot of meaning about what life is about, right? We came for a purpose. And without even recognizing what it is all about, we have already slept through and we are gone, right? And these are kind of parables which actually shook me, right? Which made me think, I mean, is there something beyond what we have to achieve, right? I think that those kind of things actually came from Swami Paramahamsa's work, actually.
That is the wonderful anecdote that you have shared with us. And you have also been exposed to various sampradayas also. As I read out, you was also influenced by Avadhuta Sampradaya, Shakta Sampradaya, Aurobindo Yoga. How does these sampradaya see the ultimate reality? Could you please share some thoughts on it?
Yeah. So in terms of the traditional ones, right, that you mentioned, the Avadhuta and Shakta, from ultimate reality perspective, there is no difference. They all look upon the Parabrahman as what is to be attained, right? So the difference is only in terms of how they approach it. And Avadhuta, there's no major. In fact, I read it even before I came into Vedanta studies. But so there, I have read Avadhuta Gita, and there used to be a book by name Datta Prasadam, which used to come. Actually, there was a Swamiji by name Swami Krishnananda who was in our mutt I mentioned in my village, and later he had an ashram in a place called Chendamangalam. So he was one of the early influences on me, because when I went to Banaras for my college, one of my friends gifted me a Bhagavad Gita by Annie Besant, a simple translation. So I used to read that. So when I went to meet this Swamiji during the summer vacation along with my grandfather, so my grandfather just introduced me and then told him that hey, he's Swamiji, he studies this Bhagavad Gita, right? Then he actually gave me a lot of advice. He said, you have to read it more than once, and as you keep reading the same thing second time and third time, the way you will look at it will change. So he gave a lot of those kind of inputs, and he was from the Avadhuta Sampradaya, and a lot of things I heard from him. And also this Datta Prasadam was a magazine that he used to publish, and he actually started sending it to me also. So I used to read that. Okay, I didn't understand much of it that time, because obviously I wasn't exposed to proper Vedanta, but I kind of got broadly what they were talking about, right? So when I now recollect, and I also had spoken to Puji Swamiji once on it, so it's pretty much it is aligned to Vedanta only. So in terms of Shakta, I had different context, right? Because I was in Banaras, and I was pursuing the spiritual journey, right? So obviously I was running here and there depending on whatever comes across. So trying to see how I can grow myself through that. So Shakta was because it is close to West Bengal, Assam and all that. There are a lot of Bengalis, and there is a very significant set of people who follow Shakta, and primarily Vamachara there. Okay.
Yeah.
And here in South, we usually find more Dakshina and Navavarna and all that here, Sri Vidyopasana. So there it is more meditation driven, and so I got into more of practices. And there was one ashram called Navamundi Ashram, which was set up by one Vishuddhananda Saraswati long back, like 100 years back. So we used to meet there and do some spiritual practices and all that. That's how I got into it, which helped me a lot. I mean, obviously, before you even get into Vedanta, it is about Chitta Shuddhi and Chitta Naischalyam, right? And for that, these kind of practices tremendously help. But in terms of ultimate, there is, again, Shakta also is focused on the same thing. Only thing is, it is looking at it more from Prakriti and Maya perspective, right? Rather than looking at it from Brahman. So it's just other way of looking at it from another angle. And that's how Puji Swamiji also put it to me. In fact, I was talking to him on that. So that way, again, I don't see from an ultimate reality perspective, there is a big difference in both. The third one, in Aurobindo, there is a difference, obviously, right? So he looked upon the whole process as an evolution. Okay, like the Dashavatara is always looked at as an evolution, right? From Matsya Kurma and all that to amphibian to a human plus animal and then human. So, and then Krishna is considered Purnavadara, but Aurobindo looks at it as there is the next step, right? Where he looks at it as a supramental consciousness which actually transcends, which actually comes down, and the inert becomes conscious. Okay, that is how he looks at it. Okay. So that is why you will find that Swami Aurobindo's symbol also is there is a one inverted triangle and one upward triangle, and wherever they meet is where the lotus is, right? So basically what he's saying is this inert actually goes towards the conscious, and conscious also comes down, descends, and then they meet together. Okay, that is his philosophy, if you want to call that. And he actually said in 1940s it already descended on him. Okay, that was his thing. And again, like as a practice, I got into it, right? The effort there is again doing certain types of meditation to, basically make the inert and consciousness meet. Okay, that is kind of the approach there, which obviously is very different from what Vedanta, how it looks at it. So to your question, how they look at reality, I think there is a slight difference in the way Sri Aurobindo looks at it.
And you were also exposed to Patanjali Yoga, or was it only Aurobindo Yoga?
I used to do because I was practicing different meditations in the Shakta thing. So the Kundalini to some extent I was practicing, but yeah, mostly Aurobindo and that kind of a mix. And obviously, I was little here and there. So, like I said, I was very confused at that time. So,
I think this all helped in preparing the chitta to be a samskara. Chitta
yeah,
samskara
yeah,
happened through all these process.
exactly. Everything is for a purpose. I totally agree with you. So, this whole thing, they say, right? We don't choose. It's you are just destined to go. But the way things. So now, if you look back, the way things all happened, you can clearly see that everything was for a purpose, right? So we have nothing to complain about one thing or the other. So.
Yeah. And you graduated from IIT BHU as an engineer, and you also worked in US as a software engineer. And now you're also teaching Vedanta, Samskrita, and you're also practicing Vedanta. How did you make this transition from a practicing engineer to practicing Vedantin? And what are some of the hurdles that you faced moving from US to India? And how did you overcome it?
Yeah. So I think there is some amount of conflict, at least in the way, because we move in a modern day society, and then you have this your passion and your your inner journey is towards Vedanta, right? So now you have to reconcile somewhere. Some people take very extreme um, positions on these things, right? So they just completely go off. I have seen people who worked in the US who left everything and then almost a near sannyasi kind of lifestyle because they wanted to go to the other extreme. But in my view, I think I used to be like that. I mean, I was also till, in fact, in my college days, I even left the college once and then went in as a wanderer for a few days and all that. So we all have this kind of fallacy about what sannyasa is about and all that, right? So I also had all those, but later, after listening to Pujya Swamiji, I think one of the things that he always emphasized is keeping the spirit, and the forms can change. Okay, that was his one other big contribution, right? Today's Vedanta lectures, you hear from anybody, whether it is from Chinmaya Mission or the other Swamis they are all influenced one way or the other by this, because Swamiji re-looked at things like Karma Yoga and other things also, keeping the spirit intact. But how can you still look at Karma Yoga in modern context, right? If you have to look at Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavan is talking primarily in the context of Yajna and how that can become a Karma Yoga, right? But how do you look at it in a modern context? Like today, you can't make the world go back to a olden system, right? Older system. So that's where he kind of adopted in many things. Like I mentioned, psychology into vasanas and all that, right? So how do you actually bring that synergy between what is modern and what is tradition, right? So the crux of that is, how do you keep the spirit of what is intended when something is said, and forms you can slightly change based on the context. So that is how everything was looked at. So in that sense, I didn't have that big a problem. Obviously, there are few things that we all don't want to compromise on, so we keep that. But at the same time, to reconcile with the modern and my Vedantic things, I didn't see that very difficult. Also, I think the way we can take it forward. See, one important thing is to be in. So if you have to teach, right? If you want to really help people by teaching Vedanta, you need to live their life, right? Then only you can also. That is what Swamiji did. So because he was, see, even till 2014 or 15, till he was there, when he was like 85, he could converse with a 12-year-old or 17-year-old kid. Okay, that was possible because he was current all the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember in 90s when I spoke in one, he asked me to talk on some subject. I spoke about computer programming. Okay, at that time he didn't have an idea on programming, right? He was very uncomfortable that he didn't know it. Okay, so and one day he even remarked in a class, these people say windows. I don't know how to even understand what this is. The only window I see is what is there in the hall and all that, right? So he was so uncomfortable not having a knowledge of it. But by 2010 and 12, he was very conversant, right, with the social media and other things. He was all aware, right, because he kept himself current, right, despite being a Swami. He wanted to make sure that he understood what the problems of people so that he can actually communicate to them, right? So I think we have to reconcile, right? We can't stay, we have to keep the tradition because it has something to offer. But at the same time, we have to be in thick of what the current world is, so that we can actually help in bridging it, right? So to that extent, I think we have been able to keep that because of Puji Swamiji's blessing. I mean, I wouldn't say it was very easy to do that. So obviously, I had my own dogmas, I had my own clingings for some time. I initially, when I started my course, the initial 2-3 months was very difficult because I was also little, I would say, I had my own orthodox clingings, right? So, and some of which you have to reconcile. It is not very easy to leave it, especially the initial few days, because you don't know what is going on. Then once you understand Shastra and what it is trying to say, why are we trying to adopt, and why it is not wrong to adapt some of these things, because you are keeping the spirit intact, then it is okay. Then you kind of start reconciling. That's what happened.
Yeah, thank you for that beautiful answer that you gave. And there is a famous Vakya from Upanishad that is Kshurasya dhara nishita durgah patastam kavayo vadanti. That is, Vedanta is a very tough path. And what are the prerequisites for studying Vedanta? And how should a seeker of truth prepare themselves?
Sure. So it is a few things. Okay. So the first thing, I think, again, I would bring people listening to this to one of the key elements of tradition, right? Recognition of Ishvara is extremely important. Okay, you can't bypass Ishvara and become a Vedanta. Okay. But then what we call as Ishvara, what is Ishvara is important, right? So while initially we all start with some Pauranic view of what Bhagavan is, but in terms of what the Samashtitvam of Ishvara, right? The all-encompassing, the infiniteness with which Ishvara is looked at. That's what entire Bhagavad Gita looks at Ishvara like that, right? So relating to that Ishvara, the Samashti, that you are part of the whole, right? That recognition is very important. I think that is the starting point, because the Vedanta needs a certain preparedness. The problem is not, see, Vedanta is revealing a vision, right? So all it is saying is everything is Brahman, right? So it's so simple. It's a one line, one sentence. Of course, there is a prakriya to teach it. But what is important is preparedness, right? That is where we have a problem. Okay. When you sit in the class of Vedanta also, while the words are coming, but it is becoming difficult for us to comprehend, right? So even after some time, so that is because of the preparedness. So when sadhak, so that is where we say it is difficult, right? So difficult not because the subject matter is difficult, but it's because your preparedness is not there. Right? Now to prepare, that's where the first step is to relate to Ishvara. That is very important, because here the Vedantic study addresses two things, right? Not one is the intellectually understanding what it is. Second, you need to be emotionally ready for it. Okay, so there is intellectual aspect and emotional aspect, right? And the emotional preparedness is what is the hindrance, because here Vedanta is trying to falsify the notion that you are a limited individual and then show that you are actually a Purna Swarupa, right? Then the resistance comes from this individual because of the mind and the psychology around this person, right? Now, if you have to resolve these problems, so you have to process the psychological issues that one has, right? So which means you need emotional maturity to happen. And for that emotional maturity to happen, you need to fall back on what Papuji Swamiji used to call as the infallible, the one that does not fail. And that is nothing but Ishvara only. Okay. Unless you have that recognition of Ishvara, which is where Karma Yoga comes into picture, Bhakti comes into picture, all of these come into picture, right? So without recognition of Ishvara, just going after consciousness, Vedanta Jnana doesn't take place, right? So I think I'm telling this because there is a modern day Vedanta problem where it is seen as, because this 4 paths to yoga, for the intellectual it is Jnana Yoga, for the emotional it is Bhakti Yoga. So we all hear all this, right?
Yes.
But that's not what Bhagavan says in Gita. So the only way to Jnana, moksha is Jnana. And that Jnanam is possible only if you are emotionally ready and intellectually ready for it. And for emotional readiness, the only way Bhagavan also says is Karma Yoga, which is recognition of Ishvara, and it's not different from Bhakti also. Bhakti and Karma are same, because in both cases you are recognizing Ishvara only. So as a first step, I would say recognition of Ishvara as number 1, right? Then second, I would say we have to understand the Pramana Vyavahara, what I was talking about, right? See, first you have to change from being a mumukshu to a jignasu. Okay, see, everybody has a pursuit. Everybody has, and people who are spiritually inclined, they are pursuing it, right? Now, so whether you go to this Kriya or Sudarshana Kriya, or you go to study some yoga or whatever, the intention is that I want to be free, right? I want to be free of these limitation, bondage, whatever. So most of the people are mumukshus when they are in this pursuit, right? They are after moksha, whether they call it as moksha or not, but they want to get liberated. They want to be free of all these limitations, all the problems. So mumukshu is that. But converting a mumukshu to jignasu, that jnanam only gives me moksha, is a first step, right? Unless you get to that, then so that is a big transformation. Somebody needs to recognize that yes, while I want moksha, that moksha can be gained only through knowledge, because I am already mukta, and there is no other way to gain this. Because being a limited person, by adding a few things, I am not going to become limitless. Unless I become limitless, I am not going to be mukta, right? So becoming a jignasu from a mumukshu is the second essential thing, right? People have to recognize the difference, and then comes this part of pramana. So when I say I am a jignasu, that means I need to know. If I have to know, I need a means to know. Otherwise, it's only a belief, right? Suppose I tell you that heaven you will go, right? Then if you believe, it's your belief, right? That is not what we are saying. Here we are talking about a jnanam, aparoksha jnanam, that you are right now Brahman, right? That means you need a means of knowledge, and the means should be capable enough to give you that jnana, right? And that pramana buddhi, that we need a means of knowledge and I need to do shravanam for that, has to be recognized, right? The pramana, how the pramana pravritti takes place, is something that I think one has to recognize. I think that was my second thing, right? And the third, I would say, we have to move from this is the modern day problem, right? We are after techniques, right? I do this technique, that technique, and I do some kriya, and suddenly one day I'll get moksha, right? Or some guru I follow and I do puja and all that, suddenly one day he will give moksha, right? This instant gratification thing is what people are looking for, right? I think this from the technique thing, one has to move, have the patience, and then start listening, right? Initially people may not understand, but they have to persevere. So there is a story, right? There were 2 people who were doing tapas, okay, and Narada came to one of these persons and he asked, when will I, so he was trying to get moksha, or look at, have darshana Bhagavan, whatever you want to call. Then Narada says, you look at this tree, yeah, there are how many leaves are here. As many births later, you will see Bhagavan if you do japa or whatever, the tapas, right? Then he said, no, I can't wait for that long, and he walked away. Then he went to the other person, he asked the same thing, and he said the same answer. he was very happy. So are you then assuring me that I will one day definitely see? Then it doesn't matter. What else is your goal, right? So your only goal is to get liberated. If it takes 10 births, so be it, right? Now the question, because you don't have a choice, otherwise you're going to remain limited, right? What else you have? So once you recognize that moksha is what you want to pursue, and you need jnanam for it, you have to persevere, right? So you have to start somewhere. So I think people have to keep patience and start on the journey, and have to recognize that jnanam is the one which is needed. And I would say if these three are there, recognition of Ishvara, the pramanya buddhi, and keeping patience and going through it, I think those are the preparedness one needs, right? So,
I think you made a very important point about the pramana, and it is very much lacking in the modern teaching, that is recognition of Shruti pramana as a means to knowledge. I think that should be reconciled by the teachers also.
Yeah.
And moving on to the next question, often people misinterpret the famous statement, that is Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, Jiva Brahmaiva Naparaha. How is the mithyatvam of the Jagat should be seen here in this particular statement? And could you please elaborate on that?
sure. So when people hear the Satyam and Mithya, the immediate thought about Mithya is it's an illusion, right? Like Maya, or even Maya also has to be understood, but people generally take world is an illusion, and they even criticize Shankara as a Mayavadi. Okay. But the Mithya is a very technical word. It is used in a specific meaning, with a specific meaning attached to it. The Mithyatvam is, if you have to translate in English, it means dependent reality. That's what Mithya means. It doesn't have its own independent reality. It is dependent on something else. There are many typical examples given, like pot, clay, and all that. We will take wave and water, for example. So we say wave is a dependent reality on water, which is the actual reality. There is nothing substance called wave. The substance is only water, right? That is the context of Mithya. So for you to understand that wave is Mithya, you need to understand that water is Satyam. So you need to understand what is Satyam to dismiss something as Mithya, correct? Now, when people say Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya, even before somebody even understands what is Brahman, people just try to understand what is Mithya. So it is impossible to understand wave is Mithya unless you understand what is water, and water is Satyam in this ocean, correct? So unless you recognize water, you cannot dismiss wave as Mithya. So for you to understand Mithya, at the same time Satyam has to be understood. So Satyam and Mithya have to be understood together. That's the only way you can understand it. So in fact, when you understand Satyam, the Mithya is more a word, correct? Because the moment you have understood water, the wave is just incidental, right? You don't actually recognize some substance called a wave anyway. So that is what happens in Satyam Mithya also. So people immediately, Mithya and Maya, they just dismiss it as an illusion. So we don't say Tucham. Tucham is non-existent. So we don't say something world is Tucham. We are not dismissive about the world. Unlike, so people often think that Buddhism and Advaita are same. That is not true, because Buddha says everything is illusion, but there is no substance underneath. So the moment you dismiss the substance underneath, then what you call as illusion actually becomes real for you, because there is nothing else to cling on to, right? So like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa used to say, if you ask a person to leave a branch, he won't leave, but ask him to hold on to a higher branch, then he will leave the lower one, right? So it's like that, right? So the moment you recognize Brahman, Jagat Mithyatvam automatically gets established, right? You don't need to separately make your mind for that, right? So here what people are trying to say, they want to just say, hey, this is all illusion, because they are uncomfortable with certain things in the Jagat. So they want to use this Mithya as a pretext. So that is not what is intended. So Mithya is a technical word used to show what is Satyam. So what is Brahman, right? So that's why we say Adi Shankaracharya was a Brahmavadi and not a Mayavadi, right? His commitment was Brahman, not Maya. So I think that is where the confusion is.
And you also mentioned about the reality perspective of it. And to understand Mithyatvam of Jagat, we have to know the different levels of reality. And
Correct.
could you please elaborate on that also?
So we talk about three realities, right? So which is where Vyavaharika Satta and Paramarthika Satyam we talk about, right? Those are two things, which is the ultimate reality and empirical reality. Like I spoke about wave. Let's take a pot, right? Pot, you can still hold water in a pot, right? So there is an empirical reality to the pot. It's not that you can't use the pot, right? But what is the substance in it? It is clay only. So if you look at what is reality, which is a Paramarthika Satyam, it is clay. Now we generally talk about three levels of reality. One is Satyam, the second is Tucham, and then this Mithya in between, which is Sadasadhyam Anirvachaniyam, is what we say, which is somewhere in between, right? So it is a dependent. Tucham is what we talk about as a rabbit's horn and the mirage water, and those things, they don't exist, right? So asti chet na vabhaste, nasti chet na vinashyati is what we typically say about Jagat. If it is not there, how are you able to see and interact in it, right? But at the same time, when you analyze it, it doesn't stay. If you say, I have this cloth, so what is this cloth? Then you have to go to fabric. Then what is this fabric? Then you go to yarn. And then what? So you just go one step after the other. It just keeps going, right? It doesn't end anywhere. So Adi Shankara in Bhashya talks about it. Any effect is not different from the cause, right? And that cause, again, it is not separate from that's its own cause. So if you keep going like that, so any object you take goes and resolves only in Satta Samanya. Okay, so in Brahman, if you have to say that. No, so that is why we say you cannot dismiss it as non-existent, because you have an experience of it. But at the same time, you cannot establish it to be existing by itself, because it resolves to something else. So that is the in-between reality we talk about, right? The Satyam Mithya also come in that context. But overall, we say there is a Paramarthika Satyam and Vyavaharika Satyam. There's something to interact, and there is an ultimate reality, which is what Brahman is, which is where the pursuit is to learn. Yeah.
That was a wonderful answer. Thank you for that. And you mentioned about your Guru Bhai Jaishankar ji, and both of you have started a Gurukulam named Arsha Vidya Varshini after Swamiji's guidance. What is the purpose of starting the Gurukulam, and what are the activities that you carry out?
Sure. See, Gurukulam, the Guru and Shastra have to go together. Okay. You cannot study the Shastra by yourself. That will be the first mistake, right? Swadandrena Atmanveshanam na kuryat is what Adi Shankara also says. Because this is a knowledge which happens due to an independent pramana, which is Shastra. And that vision comes to you when you completely suspend yourself and you commit yourself to the Shastra, and the vision is unfolded. So that means Shastra has to be there, because Shastra is there is a prakriya, there is a methodology to reveal. The vision is revealed from a teacher to the student through a methodology. That's called prakriya. So you need Shastra, and you need somebody who can handle the Shastra. That Sampradaya with we say, right? In Shastra itself says. Okay. So that is where Guru is important, and Guru has to unfold. So there is a need for a Guru and Shastra to be together to unfold. So that is one. Second, other than the Shastra study, there are other practices and things which go with it, right? So a Gurukulam is typically needed to be effectively communicating this, because we all studied in a Gurukulam, so which was a very intense 3-year program, but we stayed with our Guru, right? So while there is teaching, but along with there are also certain other things which go on, right? Because you are growing in the process. And towards that growth, you need some help, you need certain direction, so all those are there. So that is where, and obviously our Swamiji also had guided us to have a Gurukulam. So a Gurukulam, so while we have these online classes and all these going, but they only cover certain things, right? We don't even know how much people are grasping, and it's always a broadcast. So we are not able to see what is the reception, where are people getting confused. All those things are not known. So the teaching is to only some extent effective if you do it in an online mode, right? So that is where I think there is a need for Gurukulam and the Guru Shishya methodology of teaching, especially with Vedanta. There is no choice. In fact, we need to have that. So because of that, we thought as a service we should, we also have our commitment to this knowledge which we have got from our acharyas and from yeoman years. People have given it to us, and it is our responsibility to take it forward. So towards that, and with our guidance from our Swami, so we decided, I wouldn't say decided, in his guidance, in his direction. So we started off this in 2014-15, even when Puja Swamiji was still with body. In fact, we actually told him that we have bought this land and we have started it, and he blessed us before he took his samadhi.
And what are the activities that
yeah. So it is primarily a teaching institution that we are intending to do. So right now the Gurukulam is, we only have a place and we have a Goshala, and we have two temples there. The one that you mentioned about Sharadamba, Vigneshwara and Acharya, that is one temple. And we recently had a new Sri Krishna temple also constructed there. So those are there right now. We are starting construction. So right now the Gurukulam activities is pretty much online, right? I am teaching and Jaishankar ji is teaching, Sri Vidya ji is teaching. So we are teaching right now virtually through online thing, but eventually that would move into Gurukulam. But as of now, it's primarily Goshala. We have about 35 cows that we are taking care. We do puja, and there are some local activities that we participate in, like, teaching some kids and all that. But most of our Vedanta classes are online right now. That is also part of Gurukulam, just that it's in a virtual mode right now. Yeah.
And the Vedanta Shastra has also come through Guru Shishya Parampara through question and answers only. And all the Upanishads that we see is just question and answer. A Shishya asks his Guru and Guru guides him.
Yeah. I agree. But unless, you're right. Unless you know where the student is stuck, it is very difficult to tell, right? Otherwise, we will be extempore telling something and it won't be effective. Yeah. So it is important the dialogue is there, because in fact the whole Bhashyam is in a dialogue format, right?
Yes.
Purvapaksha Siddhanta is how the clarity is given. Yeah.
And what are the courses that you're conducting through online media now?
So right now I am doing Taittiriya Upanishad. The last 3 years, it's almost getting over now. I'm in the final Ha portion of it.
And it's with Karthikam?
I didn't take Karthika. I have only Bhashyam. That itself took almost 3 years. So with some Tika help.
Anandagiri Tika.
Yeah. So which is there. And Bhagavad Gita I'm taking in Tamil. So I'm right now only in the end of 3rd chapter. It's been like 1.5 years since I started. And I'm also taking some other Prakarana Granthas like Panchadashi.
And are you conducting any long-term courses now, or are you planning to?
Yeah, once we have the Gurukulam in place, it will be mostly 3-year residential courses, which is what we are doing. But that might be a year and a half from now. That's what this looks like. Yeah.
So the construction of the Gurukulam has started now?
It has started, yeah. So we have the plans ready and we're just starting the construction.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. The seva that you are doing for the tradition is immense, and thank you for that. And we are also coming to the conclusion of the session, and to conclude with, please give some closing remarks to the seekers of Vedanta, and how should they move about?
So I think I covered in the other question itself, but like I mentioned, I think people have to have some practices on a daily basis, right? Even Puji Swamiji, when we all finished our course, he said, keep something daily. Okay, so that is very important. Whether it is some japa or some puja, for us, he suggested that we teach every day. So people need to keep that. It is very important. Okay, that's one. Any anushtanam is also okay, but that's number one. Second, like I think I have already mentioned, so we have to start while we practice these things. We have to start listening to Shastra, right? Because the paperback is okay to motivate people. So if you read, the great seers of past, it kind of gives you a motivation to actually come and study. Okay, but beyond that, it can't take people far, right? So we need to study. And one other thing that I'm seeing off late, which I know it might be controversial, but let me say that. But in tradition, right, you always learn from a living guru. That is how it is, right? While, yeah, I mean, you pay respect for acharyas who were in the past, but now what has happened is people see there are a lot of misconceptions, right? A lot of people recognize that guru is important, right? They say through guru only you can gain moksha. All that as a sentence people hear, but then they go and do murti upasana for some guru, and they stop with that, right? Which is okay. Having a murti and doing puja is fine. But if you stop with that, then the purpose of this guru itself is lost. With all the reverence, I think we should move with. That's what those gurus also would want you to do, right? So I think people have to come out of those things, because these are all, I see a lot of these modern day challenges in people's understanding. One, like I said, is around how they look at. So people don't understand Vedanta or Jnanam as the main to moksha, right? Everybody is after some or other, and this is how I look. So there is a hero worship of some guru, and then they get stuck with that. Okay, so I think so people have to be open-minded, try to understand what moksha is, remove a lot of this mysticism. Mysticism is okay to bring people to glorify this knowledge. There was some amount of mysticism which was brought in those days, but I think people have to come out of mysticism, look at it more practically. If somebody else can be a jnani, so you can also be a jnani, right? So pursuit is for everybody, right? We always, there is so much of mysticism around it. They say, hey, jnani means somebody, some Jata Bharata, some Sadashiva Brahmendra in those days, or Janaka. And that's how we think, right? This is not something for us, right? We can only at the most, put some pushpa on their pictures and then walk away, right? And that is how it is today, right? I think that is why I was saying in those days, because you always found an uncle who became a sannyasi, you can know it's a common thing, right? But now you only see godmen, right? So you don't know how to pursue, right? What to pursue. I think so. That is what I would say. People look at it. I think be open about what is jnanam. So that is probably how I would say, and that would benefit all people who listen.
Thank you so much for that. Viewers, with this, we come to the conclusion of this wonderful session that we had. Kalyan Kumarji, thank you so much for agreeing to do this session, and thanks for sharing this wonderful journey and answers to some of the Vedantic questions. From the entire team of Advaita Academy, I thank you once again. Viewers, with this, we conclude the session. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
Sure. Thank you very much. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.